The story begins with the approval of the Keene Act in 1977, which outlawed vigilantes in the US. Many citizens believed vigilantes caused more harm than good, spreading fear rather than security. By October 12, 1985, Rorschach reflects on a future where the city that fears him will beg for his help, and he will refuse. Meanwhile, agents investigate the death of the comedian, thrown from his apartment window. They can't understand how someone so tough was killed, suspecting a deeper motive behind the crime. Though only government-backed vigilantes remain, they know Rorschach is still active, and they tread carefully, fearing his involvement. That night, Rorschach sneaks into the crime scene, inspecting clues and finding the comedian's suit and a Watchmen team photo. Elsewhere, Dan, or Night Owl, shares a drink with the original Night Owl before heading home. He hears sirens but doesn't intervene. Upon arriving, he finds Rorschach waiting to inform him of the comedian's death. They retreat to the basement for a private discussion. Night Owl suggests that the comedian's death might have been a simple robbery, but Rorschach dismisses this, pointing out the comedian's government ties. Night Owl then proposes it could be a political assassination, though Rorschach insists someone may be targeting masked heroes. He trusts no one, not even the original Night Owl, though Dan defends his friend. Rorschach leaves, reminding Dan that he was the one who chose to leave behind their vigilante days. Night Owl reflects on past missions with the comedian, whose arrogant and abusive methods often clash with his own. Meanwhile, Rorschach documents everything in his journal and heads to the city's seedy areas for leads. At a bar, he uses brute force but gets no useful information. Frustrated, he decides to approach Vite, the smartest man in the world. Vite, unaware of the murder, also suspects political motives. Rorschach warns him that someone might be hunting masked heroes, leaving him with a grim reminder: avoid becoming the smartest man in the morgue. Vite recalls a past meeting with his former comrades where they discussed how to help the city. The comedian was dismissive, balking their efforts and Vite's intellect, believing a small group couldn't solve America's big problems. Like Night Owl, Vite often clashed with him. Rorschach, reflecting on his unproductive meetings with old allies, arrives at the Rockefeller Military Research Center. He wonders why so few remain active and how their lives have deteriorated. The first Night Owl now fixes cars. Captain Metropolis died in an accident. Silk Spectre is in a retirement home. Mothman is in an asylum, and others have been killed or disappeared. The comedian's murder is the latest in this tragic string. Rorschach goes to warn Dr. Manhattan, an indestructible being, about a possible threat. However, Manhattan and his wife, Spectre, already know about the comedian's death, informed by the government. Rorschach notices their indifference. Manhattan views life and death as abstract, while Spectre's coldness stems from the comedian's past assault on her mother. Rorschach came to warn Dr. Manhattan and Spectre about a potential serial killer targeting masked vigilantes, not to debate the morality of the comedian. However, his indifference to Spectre's mother's past enrages her, and she demands Rorschach be removed. Dr. Manhattan silently teleports him outside. Alone, Spectre, stressed by the encounter, calls Dan to invite him to dinner, as her partner is too preoccupied. Meanwhile, Dr. Manhattan reflects on a mission with the comedian in 1977, where they were sent to Vietnam. He recalls Blake's brutal and immoral actions, even against surrendering enemies. Later in a bar, Blake discusses life with Dr. Manhattan, calling the world a joke, with the only sensible role being a comedian. A woman enters, pregnant with Blake's child, pleading with him to take responsibility. Blake dismisses her, but she retaliates, smashing a bottle across his face, leaving the scar few knew the origin of. In response, Blake shoots her, while Dr. Manhattan, capable of stopping it, does nothing. Blake accuses him of not caring about human life. Meanwhile, Spectre calls Night Owl for dinner, feeling trapped in her role as a tool for keeping her husband content. Existential doubts plague her, especially about following her mother's path as a hero. She even sees the Keene Act as a blessing, ending her unwanted life as a superhero. Frustrated that her husband can't give her a moment of attention, Spectre snaps, telling him she hates him before storming out. Dr. Manhattan remains indifferent, absorbed in his work. Seeking solace, she wanders the rainy streets, eventually arriving at Dan's house. She confesses that she's left her husband, struggling with the growing distance between them, and wonders if they were ever meant to be together. They decide to step outside for fresh air, while Dr. Manhattan prepares for a live interview. As he teleports to the studio, Spectre and Night Owl are ambushed in an alley. Forced to defend themselves, they fight off their attackers. While at the studio, Dr. Manhattan is grilled by the public. His former colleagues, now battling cancer, accuse him of causing their illness. Overwhelmed, Dr. Manhattan loses his patience and makes them disappear, retreating from the world. After the fight, Spectre and Night Owl sense a growing tension between them. Needing time to think, she retreats to a hotel, reflecting on her future. Meanwhile, news spreads that Dr. Manhattan might be responsible for cancer in those around him. Feeling he no longer belongs on Earth, and afraid of hurting others, he exiles himself to Mars. The next morning, Spectre learns of his departure. While enemies of the US seize the moment, confident that no one can stop them now. Rorschach rushes to Night Owl with alarming news. With Dr. Manhattan gone, the world faces even greater danger. On Mars, Dr. Manhattan reflects on his past. Gazing at an old photograph from 1959, his thoughts drift to his father, a watchmaker, in the day in 1945 when an atomic bomb wiped out a city. As a child, he was fascinated by clocks, but his father pushed him toward atomic science, a field the world desperately needed. Years later, he became a leading physicist, working at Flashbacks, where he met his first wife, Janie Slater. Their love story had been beautiful, but everything changed in 1966. He remembers the day Janie was crying as she packed her suitcase, but his mind drifts back to a key moment, the day he returned to the lab to retrieve a watch he had left in his coat for her. Unfortunately, that decision trapped him inside the intrinsic field machine. As it activated, Jane watched in horror as pure atomic energy disintegrated him until he vanished completely. Days later, a funeral was held, though the coffin was empty. However, strange occurrences began. First, a nervous system appeared in the bathroom, then a circulatory system in the dining room, and finally, a partial skeleton emerged outside the lab. In time, he fully reconstructed himself, becoming a being of pure energy. Despite his return, something fundamental was lost. Janie sensed he was no longer the same, and the country seized the opportunity to mold his new image as a powerful weapon. Dr. Manhattan, now following the Pentagon's orders, abandoned morality in his actions. He recalls Hollis retiring, and how his wife mentioned that people saw him as a god, even being hailed as a superhero by John F. Kennedy. Still, he had promised Janie nothing would change, that he was the same man. But, during a meeting with his team, a young woman sat next to him, Spectre, and their connection sparked. This led Janie to discover their relationship in May of 1966. Heartbroken, she packed her bags and left, suspecting this betrayal all along. Manhattan recalls his first tender moments with Spectre, all while the vow he had made to Janie echoed in his mind. Overwhelmed by Earth's trivial problems, he retreats to Mars, creating his own world, a clock-like structure. He reflects on who might be to blame for his tragedy. His father for pushing him towards science, Janie for asking him to retrieve her watch, or himself for not waiting a few more minutes before entering the machine. All the while, he remains aware of the past, present, and future unfolding all at once. Back on Earth, Rorschach is determined to interrogate Moloch, the last person to see the comedian alive. Using torture, he lays out his theory. Blake was terrified by the list of people diagnosed with cancer, supposedly caused by exposure to Dr. Manhattan. Both Janie Slater and Moloch are on that list. Moloch swears he doesn't know who created it, begging for the torture to stop. Rorschach eventually releases him, telling him to reach out if he recalls anything. As he leaves, Rorschach realizes the visit was pointless. Moloch knows nothing, but the mystery of who orchestrated the scandal around Manhattan still haunts him. The pieces just don't add up. Meanwhile, Spectre and Night Owl have lunch together. She's in a desperate situation. Her husband is gone. She's being evicted, and her credit cards are canceled. With only her savings left, she dreads the idea of moving in with her mother. Feeling unwanted and disposable, she saves part of her meal while thinking about where to go next. Night Owl, filled with resolve, offers her a place to stay, reassuring her that she's welcome and wouldn't be a burden. Elsewhere, Vite is on his way to a crucial business meeting when he's ambushed. His assistant and another employee are injured, but Vite quickly subdues the attacker. Despite Vite's efforts, the man dies from a cyanide capsule, avoiding any chance of interrogation about who sent him. Later, Rorschach heads to a meeting with Moloch, only to discover Moloch dead, with a bullet hole in his forehead and a gun at his feet. As Rorschach picks up the weapon, police sirens close in. Realizing he's been framed, he desperately tries to defend himself. Armed with only an aerosol can and lighter, he escapes the apartment and fights off the police, making his way up the building. But his efforts are in vain. As he leaps from a window, he's captured. Despite his protest that he's been set up, the officers unmask him, revealing his identity to the world. Spectre starts settling into Night Owl's home, while Vite reflects in his office, concluding that the world is sinking further into corruption. In the credits, Hollis recounts his decision to retire and pass his mantle to a younger successor. He also talks about Laurie Jupiter, the new Spectre, following in the footsteps of her mother, Sally Jupiter, the original Spectre. When Hollis published his book, the world viewed superheroes differently. They had become integral to American society, for better or worse. Janie Slater is interviewed about her illness, revealing that the truth won't change her cancer diagnosis. In a post-credits scene, we learn that a world war is on the horizon due to Dr. Manhattan's absence. Night Owl and Spectre have teamed up, aiding those in need, while investigating the events. Suspecting Rorschach may have uncovered a dangerous secret, his silencing, the deaths, Dr. Manhattan's revelation, and the looming war in Europe all seem connected. If they fail to stop what's coming, there will be no turning back. Lastly, Spectre manages to contact Dr. Manhattan, hoping to convince him to save humanity. However, he remains indifferent, believing humanity's extinction is inevitable and beyond saving. In September 1986, Alan Moore released Watchmen, one of the most acclaimed comic book series ever. This anti-superhero story is known for its deep themes and unforgettable characters. The 12-part series won a Hugo Award and has been adapted into both a movie and a TV series, each offering a unique take on Moore's work. The Zack Snyder film is solid, while the TV series presents a more artistic and abstract interpretation. Now in 2024, Watchmen returns as an animated film from DC Animation, split into 2 parts and using CG animation. It stays true to the source material, with Chapter 1 closely mirroring the graphic novel. The first part includes extra elements like comic strip segments and Dr. Manhattan's origin, blending an investigative crime thriller with an exploration of what it means to be human in this alternate 1985 America, where superheroes are part of daily life. Rorschach's quest to uncover the murderer of his former comrade, the comedian, leads him to a plot to eliminate all superheroes. The film captures the comic style and tone effectively, but suffers from some issues. The animation, while modern, lacks the noir, hand-drawn quality of the original, resulting in a sterile feel. Shadows and textures are often missing, diminishing the visual impact. Additionally, the voice acting is a mixed bag. While some performances are spot on, others fall short, especially Rorschach's gravelly voice, which diverges from the graphic novel's monotone and eerie portrayal. Despite these issues, Watchmen Chapter 1 is a strong adaptation that honors the comics, covering the first 5 chapters well. The ending sets up the second half to build on the solid foundation. Fans of Watchmen will likely appreciate this adaptation, though it's not without its flaws in animation and voice work. Thank you very much for watching the whole video. And if you have a movie or TV show that you want us to cover, just comment it down below. We'll make a video of it in the future. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out our playlist for more recaps.